all good? All right. Well, welcome to our webinar today. It's all about interactive reading, and this has also come from the fact that many of our participants have asked for a bit more delving in deep to this aspect of supporting children's communication and language. So all the evidence points to interactive reading being a really good, safe bet for supporting children's communication and language development. They are progressing faster than if they have not received interactive reading type interventions. So what does this look like and how does it work? So if we go to the EEF evidence store, it's really quite in depth. You can see it's the third approach. And these first three, the teaching and modelling vocabulary, the teaching and modelling of language, and the interactive reading, actually have the most evidence to support them progressing children by about 7 months compared to children who haven't had these sorts of interventions in place or these sorts of practices from their key workers or their main class teacher or their room lead. So if you want to know a little bit more, do remember to go to the EEF evidence store. When you search that, you need to say that you're searching for the early years EEF evidence store, because there is one that is non-early years and then you'll get lost. So early years EEF evidence store is what you need to search. So there is strong evidence that it can improve language and communication, and this is a direct quote from the EEF guidance. And what is that looking like in practice? Rather than reading the story with your children in silence, this approach is really about the book being a conversation starter and the children you're working with giving you as much language as possible. So you're inviting the child to comment, you're inviting them to talk about pictures. You're not going through, as this lady here is doing, she's going through every single word that is on that page. Interactive reading is not about that. It's more about the children getting a sense of the story from the illustrations and them offering their comments. You can use this in different ways. If you're revisiting a story that the children know really well, you can get the children to already have some information about that story and recall the story. Recalling a story is deemed to be a really good approach as well. And what you as the practitioner do is build on the language that they give you, rather than you thinking, I really want to tell them about this. You need to tune into what they've noticed, what's important to them, and take the lead from that and build on that. So you start having a really natural conversation. And it may be that you only look at 2 or 3 pages. This is not about completing, going through the whole text. It's about getting your children to speak. And a really powerful way is for the conversation then to lead on to the child's own experience, where they may make connections with their home life, they may make connections with an activity they've done earlier in the day or in the previous week. And that's really powerful because you're getting the child to reconnect with an experience that they've already had. And they're hooking new information onto old information. We will send these slides around so that if you look at this slide as a slideshow, this is a live link to the EEF Communication and Language section. And at the bottom of that, there are some wonderful videos for you to see the practice in action. And I urge you to have a look at those. It's a bit tight today in 45 minutes to have a look at both these videos, but I recommend you look at the fish eyes one and the bath time one if you are pressed for time. Those are two in which you can see a lot of the approaches within the interactive reading being exemplified. So it's really good for you to note what's going on in each. Sorry, that ping was my email. Sorry about that. So here, a lovely situation in the 2-year-old section of the nursery here at Charles Dickens Primary, with a practitioner who's very adept at bringing stories to life, making stories really exciting with the expressions that she's using. And this is a group of 2-year-olds who are absolutely enraptured by the text. They're finding it really fun, but also they're very tuned in because the adult is showing awe and wonder about the text. And here, a smaller group have chosen this text. So this is only a couple of weeks ago. Again, they're 2 years old and they're having a look through a favourite text that they've seen a few times. And what was lovely to see was at one point, the practitioner said to the children, "Oh, what do we think is going to be happening next?" And the child with the builder's hat on very excitedly said, "Mother, he's going to be captured by the fox." And he had said that in a very approximate way. He said something more like captured. And the adult carefully rephrased that for the whole group to hear it said correctly without drawing attention to correcting him, and said, "Yes, I think you're right. He might be captured by the fox." And then they carried on, and it was all very fluid. So no attention was drawn to the fact that he'd made a little mistake in his speech and language, but she did rephrase it beautifully so that everybody could hear the correct word. And they were actually very excited to hear such a long word being used. So she broke it down further and tapped it out, and that also gave them a routing to this new word, captured. And here, this is an example of using a text that's very applicable to the time of year and to the curriculum that you're offering for your children. So in this setting, they were talking to the children about water and the cold and ice. This was back in January, and so they were relating that back to the seasons and the connection with the cold time of the year. So a wonderful way to build vocabulary through the children's interests and fascinations, but also making those words that you really want them exposed to available in the space. So they had a selection of books that were examples of what they were teaching in their activities and what they were getting the children to learn about across the space during their continuous provision. And this is just an image that I thought was lovely from a recent webinar, our webinar about love, where texts have been chosen to teach something very specific, and just to remind you to have those texts available that are underpinning the curriculum that you want to be taught in that term or in that week or in that moment. So here it was very clear, it's about feeling a sense of belonging, knowing what love is, and really explicitly teaching the children the emotion, love, and the feeling that that brings and what it does to your body And what better way to do that than through a text and allowing the children to have a chat about what they can see and what they like about receiving a hug, or why this baby is loved so much, and how they were a baby once and they were also cuddled. And they may still be cuddled because, of course, we're all cuddling all the time. So looking a bit more deeply into the approach, there are prompt-based practices, and these are very clearly listed. This is cut and pasted from the EEF guidance, so this is a snapshot for you if you don't have time to go back to the EEF guidance. So questioning is a prompt-based practice. That's when the adult is using open-ended questions rather than closed questions, because the whole point here is to get conversation from the child. I understand that we're working with a lot of children who do not have much language, and that would be up to you to gauge how much questioning to use and how much to narrate rather than question, or whether you need to have opportunities for the child to point in response to your questions. So the recalling of events or experiences where the adult is facilitating a conversation about what's happened in the past and what might happen in the future within the text. Do they have an idea of what they think might happen next? And then completion, which is something we use quite often with those children who maybe don't have that many words. We might start a sentence and let them complete it by leaving a gap, or we might say a phrase that is really well known in the text and leave a gap for the child to complete. So what you can see with these different practices is that you can differentiate through your child using those different practices. So depending on the prior knowledge and capabilities of your child, you'll be using those practices more or less. So posing suggestions or problems. This is a really key way to do your interactive reading. Umming and ahhing, wondering, saying, that looks terribly interesting. I wonder what's going on here. I wonder what is that why not happening? You know, just posing some little queries that often gets the children quite interested in having an opinion and having their say. And the other one here is imitation. So the adult may encourage the child to imitate what they've just said. We use a practice in our whole school, which I've found to work really well in the nursery as well, which is called echo reading, where you might say a phrase and then the child says the phrase. And you say it and they say it, and that's another form of imitation that is very effective in getting children to rehearse language. Really good speech and language type suggestions as well, and practices. So the information-based practices look slightly different, where you're commenting, you're giving the information, you're saying what you can see, and you might be recapping and reminding. So you're modeling the language to summarize what's happened, and then hopefully the child will continue and start making some connections as well. You expand on what the child has said. So you're responding to the child so that there's additional information there. Where a child is noticing one feature of something in the illustration, you may add 2 features there, depending on where they are with their language development. You may be extending. So we talked a little bit about that as well. Explaining. So you may also come across things that are not obvious to the child, and that really needs explicit explaining. One of the children in the group might use a word that the others are not familiar with, like the child who said captured. That might not be familiar to them, so you may rephrase that for the others who may not have encountered the word before, and say that's when he caught the creature. That's when he got him. It's worth saying it a couple of times and simplifying it in the simplest form. Getting something is the simplest form, because we do sometimes make assumptions that children have encountered certain words and know what they mean. So it's good to be really explicit and clear. Repetition is another one of the practices. There are 3 ways to implement repetition. So, 1, select books where key vocabulary and repeated refrains are. So again, if I've mentioned Bear Hunt before, there are so many repeated refrains in there. You're definitely going to be encountering repetition in there. It's a text they know well. 2, using prompts to repeat or draw attention to keywords and phrases. So you may do my turn, your turn. I've used that before. That has worked really well. Some practitioners feel quite uncomfortable with saying my turn, your turn, because it feels very forced. But there are ways to make that quite jolly, as long as you're using quite a bit of expression. The children are usually quite keen to join that. And 3, reread the book on several occasions to embed understanding and use keywords and phrases that the child is using. So that gives you a snippet into what those practices are. So what I want to urge you to do as well is to choose your texts really carefully, remembering that they really are very powerful in teaching vocabulary you'd like them to learn, but also teaching them how to converse. And if you have chosen to teach certain things at certain times of the year, which is what your curriculum is, it's useful to have texts around that have plenty of words in them that support that part of your curriculum. And that will happen quite naturally through the conversations that come out of the books. Which words are you using? What language are you using? And not to forget books without text, because obviously if you're doing interactive reading, the texts don't have to have words in them. They can be word-based. Image-based. This is just a slide for you to be able to quickly go to the approaches in the evidence store and to the Shrek. And we would love for you to get involved in the London South. So do keep, I'll go back to this slide and I'll keep it on later. But keep in contact with us as much as possible, because we'd like to know what sorts of things you'd like training in. But I will be going back, if I can, yes I can, to some of these practices. Oh, I don't think it's urgent. No, they've gone. Sorry about that interruption. Because we're quite a small group, I'm really happy for us to come off mute, as long as there's not too much background noise. And I'd like us to have a look, just ponder on this image here of very, very young children, and just have a little think about what sort of conversations you think might be coming out of this. I think this is a mazy text. It's very colourful. There are often things missing or hidden, or I think there's a monster that they're looking for in this text. Can anyone think of some of those approaches that we've mentioned, or even if they're not exactly the approaches that we mentioned, approaches that you might use to get your children to have a conversation around this type of text, or even an experience that you've had recently with a group of children that have offered language whilst you were reading something. Is there anybody who would like to share any experience that they've had recently? I'm just having a little look down the side here. And who's the brave one? Who's
I'll
going
be
to have
brave.
Yay!
Brave.
Yes, super.
So in this example, the children are sat down, she's at their level, she's turned the book round to face them, not like hidden the book. You can tell by her face that she's got a lot of expression in her face. Maybe she's asked a question, she's putting her hand on her chin. You can tell the children are engaged because, like, that little girl is like really looking at her face to see whatever she's talking about. So yeah, she's at their level, she's reading a book. I mean, who knows whether they've read it before. My question would be, is this a spontaneous thing that's just happened and it's spur of the moment, or is it something that she's planned?
So in this instance, it's spontaneous. So this was the buffer space in between the nursery for 3 and 4 year olds and the nursery for 2-year-olds. And these children have chosen this text and they brought it to her. And they just wanted to have a little sit down time. So they're very invested in it because they chose the text. And sometimes people might think it's a bit unusual to see such young children wanting to stay for such a long time. I mean, I don't think she kept them for a hugely long time, but they were really focused and they were really, really very interested. That doesn't mean that they didn't do group times as well, but in this particular instance, it was actually spontaneous. It was the girl with the blonde hair who brought the text, and then a few of them just wanted to join. As you can see, a lot of them have coats on. They've just come from outside. They hadn't even settled in for a specific group time. It just happened spur of the moment. It was a favourite story that year they kept going back to. And it had a lot of prepositional language in it. So it actually supported a lot of their mathematical learning, and that was the language that they were finding quite tricky to embed in the children. So it served really well for supporting them with under, behind, understanding their positions, on top of, and then, you know, that those were things that they could later practice in the outdoors with their whole bodies. But this is a really good way to bring quite careful focus to the individual words. Thank you, Nicola. Is there anyone else who would like to share a recent or even a query of something that wasn't quite understood in terms of the approaches?
Hi, this is Saida.
Hi.
Hello. I just wanted to share a story that we did a couple of weeks ago with some 2 to 3 year olds. We did Whatever Next, and it sort of leads on to my question as well about using props to sort of support stories. So we had sort of like a colander, a cardboard box, some wellies, teddy bears and things. And one of the children did sort of notice that the wellies that we'd used as props weren't the same colour. So that engaged. So we were like, oh, so you know, what else was different? And we looked at, you know, sort of things like that. The teddy bear was very dirty at the end of the story, but most of us were all clean. Yeah, it was a lovely. Well, I felt it was it was a really lovely interaction between myself and the children. Yeah, so I guess my question would be, how does the role of props support things like interactive reading?
I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a fantastic point. So what the interactive reading looks like is really down to what your children are interested in, the ways that you've found that engage them most. It may be that you're taking a text outside because a child just doesn't like focusing in the indoors and they're reluctant to speak. And the use of props, again, is a really good way to get your EAL learners more interested, your SEND children more invested and keen to stay at the activity. So your interactive reading could even take the form of having the text nearby, yet acting out parts of it, because that's keeping that particular group of children interested in talking about it and talking about what's happening next. Oh, and what did they do next? And then they tell you, and they're recalling the sequence of the story as you act it out. If you have the props, you're going to engage some of those children who maybe aren't invested in just seeing the text. So absolutely, I think that's a very, very useful way of being more inclusive of those children who find it hard to stay still and focus.
We've definitely noticed when we have stories that don't have so many props, it is quite difficult because, like I said, they're very small, 2-year-olds, and it is quite difficult to keep them engaged. So wherever we can, we do try to encourage, have lots, a few resources that props that we can use to reinforce the story.
Absolutely, and if you're doing this in an interactive reading style, you can be allowing the children to talk about that prop, what they and you did exactly that, talking about how they were just like the ones in the story, they were the same color, and they're noticing that, and they might comment, oh, but I have some that look quite different, and another child might offer, I only use my wellies when it's raining. Why do we need wellies today? And the conversation can go into a slightly different tangent. But what they're bringing to it are things that are meaningful to them, and they're building their conversational skills. So that's the purpose of interactive reading. It is important also to realise that they're not suggesting only do interactive reading, never read a story. Of course, we want to read stories so that we're developing children's listening and attention skills. But the proven, the evidence out there is proving that interactive reading really develops the communication and language, so the speaking. And the two-way conversation, whether that's verbal and non-verbal, because those who are pre-verbal will be developing communication differently with reduced spoken language, but there's a lot of visual language, gestural language, language seen differently. So yes, think about where you might use interactive reading in your setting, and how that might be a useful tool to teach other practitioners within your setting. You might model it for somebody so that you know they have an intervention that they can use. If you're a room lead, say, You might want to teach that to other practitioners that you have on the floor who can then pick up that practice, and you know that that is going to develop the children's language. But what you really want to impress upon them is those things that Nicola was talking about as well, that we want to be at the children's level, sharing the attention, responding to what they say, which is a practice within this approach. You might be rephrasing what they offer you. You may be building on what they have said. And that means if they take you on a tangent, you've got to be quite quick to adapt. Take a moment, really tune in with the child and realize, oh, they're talking about the breakfast that they had at home this morning. Because I know that we're often dealing with children that we've learned to tune into, but the way they enunciate is really hard for the other children to understand. So there's a lot of echoing that needs to happen and rephrasing so that everybody can hear what's going on. Oh, I think we have some things in the chat that would be worth looking at as well. Oh, are those all from you, Nicola? Sorry, I thought there might be a question in there. So yes, anybody else who would like to contribute something that's worked really well? Thank you, Saida, for that. Whatever next. I've always really enjoyed the simplicity of that text.
It's a great story, yes.
It's a wonderful one, and you can bring into it your rhyme. So you bring in zoom, zoom, zoom.
Yeah.
And that's as much as you can. I would encourage you to bring in rhymes and jingles and songs. That's also interactive because you'll be drawing in songs that are familiar to the children so they can join in. So they're part of the telling of the story. That is interactivity as well. So our role is really about making these EEF approaches make sense in practice. And that's when you show that you are being evidence informed. So although they explicitly list lots of approaches, things spring to mind to us, like the use of props and how that might encourage a conversation. It could be a conversation starter for a child. And also acting things out can be interactive, and using jingles and songs and rhymes. So those are all very valid vehicles for doing the interactive reading approach. I'm going to show you this other image here. Oh, hang on. Let me do it from the current slide so it's a bit bigger. So I wonder if anyone could hazard a guess as to what might be going on in here.
I think they might be looking for something.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a child there pointing something out. And it's a little creature that's been captured by the fox. And the one who's on the lap, she's very new to being settled in the space, but she's really invested in it because she can see that her companions are invested in it. And yes, they're searching. So they're really developing their skills of being able to see and differentiate and really think about what it is that they're seeing and why it is that it's been caught and what might be happening next. And although the practitioner is turning the page this time, she did get the child on her lap to turn the page quite a few times because that was her way of contributing, because she didn't have as many words to contribute, but at least she felt part of the group and part of the interactive storytelling. I will share with you something that the practitioner found really tricky. It was a real challenge for her. So she's actually used to telling a story whilst the children are silent and listening, and does that beautifully, and the children get a lot from that. But now that she's developing more understanding of the interactive reading approach, what became very difficult at the beginning of this session is all the children talking at once. She says, "But Daniela, what am I going to do? They're all firing conversation at me all at once, and it's not really working." And then after it did settle down. But what I suggested there, with a group of children who are really very, very verbal, and quite needy of adult attention. Oh, I said that. Oh, no, I said that before. I saw it first. Is really laying down some ground rules, just very clearly saying, we are going to have a look at the story today, and you're going to be the ones helping me tell the story. You're going to be the ones telling me about what you can see. But let's remember, we each need to hear each other speaking. So whoever is speaking, whether it's me, whether it's Tom, whether it's Ada, we need to be listening to that person and try really hard not to talk over them. So quite explicitly pointing out, oh, I can't quite hear that. Ada was speaking. Let's all listen to Ada. So those sort of ground rules do need to be quite explicitly taught, rather than calling them rules, just modelling them, explaining this is how we do interactive reading. We need to be able to hear each other. And she tried that a few times, and it became much easier to manage the conversation. And actually, after a while, but it does take quite a few sessions, the children started responding to each other. Because what often happens is they might only respond to what the adult says and build on that. But actually, when you've got children really understanding how to have a conversation, they build on what their peer said. And that's when you know you've cracked it and they're really getting to grips with conversing. And then they can take that into their continuous provision and have more extended conversations with each other, which is really exciting to hear when you're a fly on the wall listening to their lovely conversations. It's you know then all your hard work is paying off. So let's have a look at this one here. So
Angela,
here,
sorry
yes.
to butt in. You've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, fantastic. Right, do butt in. I like it when you butt in. So shall we go for this one? I find that story time takes much longer than planned because they ask lots of questions. Okay, so that's an important one to bring up, because if the children are at a story session that's planned as a whole group story session, that is really about the children listening, and rather than offer too many, because it's usually the same children who are going to offer the comments, you take control of that. That's quite different to interactive reading, but you can bring in a slight element of interactive reading where they all join in as a group. So you allow them to chorally respond to the end of the phrase, where you leave them to complete the phrase. So the completion point that they were making in the approach. So I think it works really well when you have a big story session to make sure the children are only speaking when you do this, when you make it clear to them. I'm doing the talking now, now it's your turn. It takes some time, but then when they get used to it, they know that when you leave the silence at the end of the phrase, it's for them to fill it. Or when you start, we're going on a bear hunt, they know to say, we're going to catch a big one. And that's where you're being interactive. You're allowing them to chorally respond. But the rules are very different when you're doing it with a smaller group as an intervention. So there's a bit of a distinction there. But also, if they're enjoying it and it's taking longer and they're all sustaining it, allow more time for it. If you possibly can, timetable that in, because it's time well spent. Is that useful? Sophie? I hope that answers your query. Is there an ideal number of children for an interactive reading group? So that is very much down to whether you are working with children with a lot of language, whether you have a mixed group, and whether you have a group of children that really need a lot of speech and language support. So it's really very much up to you. In the exemplification videos, there are a mixture. So one of the stories is told just to 2 children, and they're quite hesitant. I met the person who was involved in producing that video, actually, and now I understand why they were particularly non-responsive. It was a heat wave that day, and they were really, really, really hot, so they were quite quiet. But it does give you a nice example of quite timid children that you want to be able to hear what they're saying, and that's why the group was reduced. But we're very, very busy, so we tend to do interactive reading with slightly larger groups so that we're reaching more children. This group here that I showed, it is comprised of 2 children who find it really hard to focus, and so they've lost focus a couple of times. There's one standing behind the practitioner playing with her hair, and she always needs to be touching or doing. So that was one way to get her involved. And the other 2 who are in front are actually dipping in and out of it. So they're being allowed to participate, but they're not being forced to stay there for the entire session. So she's actually working intensively with 2 of the children, whilst the other 2 are dipping in and out. So when you're doing this in continuous provision, it's about being fluid and allowing children to join and to peel off. And that's what real life is like in many of our settings. So I hope that's useful. I'm going to have a look. No more questions in the chat. Let's see what the time is. Oh, we have got 10 minutes for any questions that you may have about this approach. The only thing I didn't spend a bit more time on is that I haven't seen this exemplified outside, but knowing that a lot of our children prefer being outside, I have seen our practitioners, and I have done this as well. We use stories that are well known in the outdoors, and we will act those out and do them in a very physical way and get the children to say the language from the text with us. And there they are rehearsing their speaking. And so that's an aspect that I didn't want to leave behind, because it's not as clear in the materials, but I think it has a very, very important role to play in interactive reading, because that's how we differentiate and that's how we are inclusive in our practice. We take these practices into the outdoors for those children who prefer that space. So I'm open to questions. And I am also going to actually maybe put in that last slide in case anybody, sorry, everybody wants to have a look at our details. It's not quite got them. Here we are. Oh, it didn't like that. Let's go through again. Here we go. And when we pass these round, actually, you're all here, so you do have all of this, apart from the Stronger Practice Hub website. So this is really useful if you want to see what other Stronger Practice Hubs are doing in the country. There are lots and lots of resources, and I was going to show you briefly here the Stronger Practice Hub in East London wrote a blog about interactive reading. Can you see this? Am I sharing the screen? I'm not sharing the screen, am I? Let me try again. There it is. Hopefully you can see this. So if you go to the Stronger Practice website, you can access the blog from A Brighter Start, which is all about interactive reading and the power of sharing books. And there are some lovely examples there of exactly how it goes. This was a lovely text which the practitioner had been using for a while, and he had created a rhyme that went with it. And the children got to choose whether they wanted to revisit the story or revisit the rhyme, which had been made into a laminated single sheet that made it very much more active for the children. So that was their way of differentiating and providing choice for the children. And here again, I think this is Rizwana here, with a lovely group of children who have taken ownership of the book, and she's listening to their comments. And you can download that on there. So I thought it'd be very useful to share the Stronger Practice Hub link there as well, so you can have a little explore of what's available. And we have resources as well that you can access. So if you go to the hubs, which is higher up, you go to England, there's London, and we are the South London Stronger Practice